Hello, music listeners, underground enthusiasts. It's 1 a.m. Why am I recording a review this late in the evening or perhaps this early in the morning? Well, put simply, I have other things to do this week and this is the only time I have to do this. We're doing an album review. This time we are going to be talking about, kind of more discussing than reviewing, we've talked about this, kind of talking about 93 Feet of Smoke's new project, ALTAR74. 93 Feet of Smoke is an alternative indie rock artist, but I think to label him as just that would be a little bit reductive, especially considering the vast array of sounds that he has produced and experimented with over the past 7 or so years. Initially finding success with like a dark ambient emo sound with songs like Degrees and I've Got a Lot of Fear for the Day That Will Be Dead, 93 Feet of Smoke has expanded his discography to include influences of alternative rock, nu metal, grunge, and even some experimental lo-fi and occasionally chiptune songs. And despite this dampened, slurred crooning remaining somewhat his trademark vocal approach for many of his songs, it would prove a difficult task to put 93 in a box. And although Bummer, 93 Feet of Smoke's first full-length album is an emotional explosion delivered with a sound that initially put him on the map, each project since then has contributed to an ever-expanding eclectic style that I've only enjoyed more as it has evolved. Sophobie, his follow-up to Bummer 2 years later in 2020, did a great job of embodying the artistic shift that 93 was going for and actively doing, being less reluctant to dive headfirst into some non-conforming experimentation, like in songs like 100K and Basketball Shorts, while still remaining somewhat grounded and sonically reserved in songs like Makeup Makes Me Pretty and Out of Gas, Out of Road. And by the time Good Grief released last year, my attention was kind of shifting back and forth between the artists that got me into underground music in the first place and new prospects of searching for artists that I was entirely unfamiliar with, but nonetheless it's a really solid project that continued to refine the alternative rock sound that in some way had kind of always been there since the beginning in 93 Feet of Smoke's discography. So, that gets us to where we are now with ALTAR74. Even as a longtime listener of 93 Feet of Smoke, I wasn't really entirely sure what I was about to experience, but experience it I did. The album kicks off with Full Moon Blood, a punchy and intense alternative rock song that calls in assistance from Extra Large Holiday Card and Janoski, one of the two. The steady intro bassline almost acts as a red herring in a way after the somewhat meta acknowledgement of the upcoming drop. The song immediately explodes with energy. The hook is instantly one to be remembered. It's anthemic and wastes no time establishing the tone and concept of the song, which seems to establish this idea of difference and agenda between 93 and another or multiple other people. The repeated "I wish you'd see me now" makes for a great catchy phrase to latch onto, and holy shit, the vocals and mixing on this are insane. The distant screams that act as the background vocals are raw and powerful. I mean, I would honestly love to hear them isolated because even as a supporting vocal track, they immensely boost the intensity and the tone of the song. It definitely feels punk-inspired, especially in the bass groove and the percussion, but the difference in vocal approach from 93, Extra Large Holiday Card, and Janoski lets the song explore a couple different avenues of the same idea. It's a pretty great and memorable start to the project. And then Word Around Town wastes no time changing the pace a little bit, introducing a wavy and relatively distorted sound with enough feedback to go around. The sharp and choppy guitar loops buzzing throughout the track create a super trancy and warm sound while retaining a small amount of distorted chaos underneath the clean and technical aspects of the production, and 93's vocals here are smooth and mellow, letting the wide drums take on the role of providing energy while he delivers a soft depiction of moving on. And that act of moving on is a tough and humbling realization, understanding in hindsight that maybe it wasn't really ever worth starting whatever this is in the first place. And the vocal clip at the end reinforces this idea that sometimes it can't be our job to do the recovering and healing for somebody else. It is a task that they have to pursue on their own terms in their own way. And I love the tonality of the song. The guitar is pretty like nostalgic in a way, while the drums pulse in and out with varying degrees of width and intensity. It's a really fun mix with some pretty fantastic sound design as well. And then there's Conversations, which was actually released as a single before the album. It's a song about self-reflection and introspection, but also the internal arguments that are an unavoidable factor that plays into understanding who you are, how your motives have changed, and the qualities about yourself that you don't view as desirable or just straight up dislike. And the lyrics, it's harder to forget it when I'm the one who said it, approach this idea that sometimes the eventual realization of your bad habits coming from yourself hurts more than if somebody else told you the same thing, due to kind of being able to write off what somebody else is saying. But when you understand these grievances yourself, it's kind of hard to deny them. And in terms of like the actual sound of the track, it's got this pretty bulletproof structure that brings you up and down throughout the energy of the track. Because after a first verse here showcasing the familiar somber approach that we know from 93, the chorus barrels through with a somewhat punk and kind of nu metal inspired sound. And honestly, this is one of my favorite 93 Feet of Smoke hooks ever. The singing is technically impressive, but it's also just so full of grit and emotion while maintaining the proficiency needed to actually hit the notes. And the heavy and abrasive breakdown at the end, it's honestly fantastic. The harsh screaming that sacrifices stability for raw power is something that the song could have survived without, but thrives with. I think it's appropriate given the topic of internal struggle and the facing of hard truths. The melancholy delivery for the verses can definitely represent the depression and drained feeling associated with the described process, but the shouted breakdowns feel like the full weight of desperation in truly not being able to escape from yourself. And then this is followed up by Chewing on My Tongue, which along with Word Around Town has one of my favorite instrumentals on the album, but for an entirely different reason. Because by this point in the album, it has become increasingly clear that this album, despite being a vulnerable depiction of reflection and the transpiring growth, it's full of bangers. Every chorus on this album hits, and it hits hard, and they feel so reminiscent of the punk and alternative emo sound and songs that I grew up listening to. Put simply, this song is about bad habits. And to put it in a more complicated way, it addresses self-destructive actions that over time have turned habitual, becoming mannerisms that stem from dissatisfaction with how one feels and finding comfort in the tendencies that observably have a negative impact on you. Remember how I said that I loved the instrumental for this song? Let's talk about that now. The dark and smooth guitar loop with this minimal amount, very tiny amount of saturation is a really great melody to support 93 singing in the beginning, and I love the resonant drums booming in the background. They're so dampened and roomy that they almost sound like war drums banging in the far distance from, far away from anything else going on in the song. But then we get to the chorus, which is so fucking 2000s. Catchy as hell, raw without sacrificing precision, and man, 93 can really sing, really belt those notes. I love his familiar approach, or at least what I'm familiar with, but when he belts out these notes, he hits them every time. This chorus will never leave my head. Agoraphobia is up next, which is arguably the most detached from the rest of the project in terms of production at least, boasting something more akin to an emo trap influence rather than the established alt-rock sound that we have become familiar with up to this point. And this is reflected in the vocal delivery and melodies, with the first verse being a hushed and delicate depiction of the song title, describing self-imposed isolation due to a fear of interaction in the outside world. And despite loving the sound that occupies most of this album, I think that Agoraphobia provides a welcome and brief change of pace before transitioning into the second half of the project. It's sonically more reserved, but continues a lot of the introduced topics in a pretty satisfying way. The sharp drums and wobbly guitar slide throughout the beat, never doing too much, never doing too little, and the repeated Agoraphobia line towards the end is just, it's mixed so well. It sounds so nice. And then Psychoanalyze gives us our first acoustic track of the album, and looking all the way back to Sophobie, Makeup Makes Me Pretty was my favorite song from that album. So an acoustic, or at least partially acoustic, track from 93 Feet of Smoke is always going to be welcome for me. And I think on songs like this, where I can fully appreciate the timbre of 93's voice, isolated with just an acoustic guitar, really brings out the soft tones and is genuinely really pretty. But this is altar74 we're talking about here. The reserved and stripped back sound would not last forever, and it doesn't, because after some great harmonies between 93 and Canner, one of the two. The punchy drums, electric guitar, and vocal energy all kick in. It's immediate and grand and then leaves as soon as it entered to usher in a verse from Canner, which is short and sweet. I love their vocal tone and I really like the verse a lot with the additional vocal harmonies paired with it. All of these more than prove how good of an idea it was to get Canner on this track. It's a song about attempted understanding, observing the small and mundane qualities of somebody and then piecing them together like a puzzle to form a larger image of who they are. And using this method due to someone being in defense mode, with walls raised so high to cover the deeper aspects of them. With these walls, all you can do in the moment is try to understand them through what they will show you. All in all, it's actually a pretty sweet song. It bleeds compassion and empathy, and it definitely stands out to me. And then we have Stuck in the Middle, which is the biggest proprietor of the nostalgic sound that this album loves to provide. It is actually like crazy to me how much this song sounds like it came out 15 years ago. If I didn't know who 93 Feet of Smoke was and had only been injecting the very best of mid-2000s emo rock directly into my veins since the day I was born, I would be fully convinced that this song was by a band that had broken up twice, had one reunion tour, and were once the subject of teen adoration and industry dislike in the year 2007. Anyways, it's got a poppy bounce to it that is familiar yet also really refreshing, and the integration of acoustic guitar melodies in the verses and this choppy saturated guitar for the chorus play into it really well, and the sound design is fantastic. There's a part in the song, I will give you a timestamp right now, it is between the 1 minute and 1 second mark and the 1 minute and 3 second mark. There is a single 2-second portion of this song that tells me everything, literally everything I need to know about 93 Feet of Smoke's knowledge and respect for the genre. You cannot fake that shit. But as much as I'm hyping this up as the new face of big personality emo rock revival, it is a song that does have genuine depth to it. I don't want my comparison of it to that time period to diminish the quality it has in a vacuum away from that association. It's really well made. It feels anthemic yet at the same time so personal. 93's singing goes so well with the bright acoustic guitar plucking throughout the background, and the writing has a nice balance of being initially palatable while retaining some intelligent lyrics. I cannot get over this song. Ain't Talking About Shit 2 is another song on this project that is just kind of fun to listen to. Not to say that the other songs aren't fun to listen to or that that's all this song provides, but there's a couple different elements in the production that really stand out to me as fun. The bass line is groovy and carries the song really nicely, and I love these monotonous guitar plucks sprinkled throughout as well. They add a tiny bit of sparkle to the moody sound, and it's the shortest track on the album, but it still accomplishes a lot with its smooth and steady chorus and short, gentle verses. I love the vocals as well. They're pretty consistent throughout and don't break away too much from the low-toned, smooth delivery, but still manage to stay engaging throughout the track. And after so many songs with these broad, grandiose sounds with whirlwinds of intensity, it's kind of nice to just have a mellow and groovy track that you can chill out to that doesn't ask too much of you. And then Shot Caller fades in with a bouncy guitar that kind of slides up and down under 93's vocals, and many people might disagree with me, but the guitar work on this track isn't too far away from something you might hear on like a Sublime record. Over this unique instrumental is, so much personality. 93 discusses his relationship with prescription medication, as well as the dichotomy between what is desired out of situations or life in general, and then what you're actually given. And how talking to someone about underlying issues and mental health problems only really works when that person is willingly receptive to what you have to say. And in the second chorus, 93 reflects this frustration with some more intensely yelled vocals, and every time he throws these out in a song, I'm never disappointed. I really appreciate the range and him knowing the tasteful way to do it. And then, as we close out the album, we end things with Feel Something at All. And despite being released as a single, this song does a fantastic job of encapsulating all of the themes addressed throughout the entire project, not only conceptually in the themes and topics, but sonically as well. In this track, 93 has a confident vocal delivery, but in reality, it's a desperation for feeling, saying that at this point, it doesn't really matter what stimulus is good or bad as long as it elicits feeling. And I think that this mentality is incredibly easy to fall into. You know, in certain mental states, things can feel hopeless, pointless, or you might not even really feel anything at all. And with that, any action taken or made against you that breaks this cycle of numbness is welcomed due to its ability to make you feel. It is a self-destructive mindset that can deceptively seem liberating. It might seem nice to not care about what happens to you anymore, but it only puts you down further. And 93 Feet of Smoke acknowledges this on the chorus, recognizing his fixation on the chaos that comes with desperation and destruction. And I think that beyond his personal experiences, this is an immensely relatable topic that resonates with a lot of people. It's important to address it, and I'm really glad that he had approached it in this way. And the instrumental is cohesive and does a great job of carrying out the melodies of 93's voice. It has this great build up to the chorus with this guitar tone shoved into the background, and then everything hits full force. The guitar is powerful and loud, and man, those background vocals, it kills it every time. This is an amazing closer to the album, and although the album does explore growth in the recognition of toxic habits, introspection, and inevitable and sometimes even unwelcome change, the deep understanding of these things displayed in this song almost feels inspiring in a way. After all, recognition of a problem is always the first step. So that's it. That's how I feel about the album. If you like sometimes occasionally nostalgic, super intense and abrasive when it wants to be, but also mellow and chill in other ways, emo rock, alt rock, occasionally nu metal as well. If you like any of these things, then I would recommend giving this album a listen. I mean, at the bare minimum, it has some of the catchiest choruses that I've ever heard produced from 93 or anybody in general. And at its core, it is fundamentally an approach to looking at oneself and understanding who you are, the habits that have made you, and, you know, everything in between. It's pretty great. It's pretty good. I like it quite a bit. I will not give it a rating because I don't do that. If you're new to the channel, I don't do that right now. Catch me in the next review where I actually take audience input this time and you all react to my review and review my review, and then eventually I'll do a reaction of your review to my review with my own review of my review to your review and my review, and then eventually it'll just be an endless loop of reacting upon reacting and content is dead. Goodbye.